Good evening. We are coming on the air with breaking news.
President Trump has just announced on social media
the U.S. has carried out a successful attack on
3 key nuclear facilities in Iran.
Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan.
6 B-2 stealth fighters dropped 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs on at least one of those sites, the very first time that weapon has been used in combat.
Operation Midnight Hammer happened this week, and I'm going to give you the details behind the operation. We've been getting a lot of questions from you asking, was it exactly as they presented it? Was there something behind the scenes? What don't we know? And there's lots of blanks that I can fill in on this one. In fact, I got one great question from @thatchaz, and here's what he asks. As a former military pilot, could you break down the details of Operation Midnight Hammer that General Kane outlined? General Kane was the first one to get to the microphone and give us the information that Midnight Hammer had taken place. B-2 stealth bombers had dropped bunker-busting bombs in Iran, and they weren't even all the way back to the States when General Kane got to the microphone and told us about the mission. Let's take a look at what General Kane has to say, and then I'm going to react.
Last night, on the President's orders, U.S. Central Command executed Operation Midnight Hammer, a deliberate and precise strike against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. This was a complex and high-risk mission carried out with exceptional skill and discipline by our joint force.
Okay, let's talk about what goes into planning and pulling off a mission like this. Now, first of all, General Kane tells us about the basic overview, and they say a lot of great things about the troops, which is absolutely awesome. My intention here is not to get into the politics of it all. My intention is to tell you how a mission like this is planned, how it's executed, and how it's pulled off. Ultimately, there are a lot of moving parts that go into something like this. So the first thing he talked about was basically the planning and the execution phase of something that, and by all means, it's a great name, Midnight Hammer. All right. This is the most top secret mission. It's only communicated to those who have a need to know, and that's going to be a very small group of people. However, as you have heard from other news reports, there were many airplanes involved in this. So how do they get all that to work together and only keep it to a small group of people? Well, it's called OPSEC, Operational Security, and operational security is hugely important in the military, and everybody is trained. If you don't have a need to know, you don't even ask a question about it. Air crews, the air crews on the B-2 and the air crews of the escort fighters and the refuelers might have only learned about this mission an hour or two before they launched and took off. How could they do that? Don't they need to get briefed on it? Many times you'll get handed a briefing packet. You'll be pointed to your airplane. They'll tell you take off and go. You've got a flight plan that takes you in a certain direction. And as you're flying, you're opening up the briefing packet and you're reading through exactly what you're going to do. That's most likely what happened here with this. These men and women didn't find out until the very last second, so that they can't go get on the phone, tell somebody else, right, spread it, that sort of thing. It keeps it very secret. That's hugely important. But readiness and preparing and planning for something like this is the first step in this. Then when you get handed the packet, you're more or less ready to go. You've kind of walked through it already. Let's take a look at what General Kane says next.
At midnight Friday into Saturday morning, a large B-2 strike package comprised of bombers launched from the continental United States. As part of a plan to maintain tactical surprise, part of the package proceeded to the west and into the Pacific as a decoy, a deception effort known only to an extremely small number of planners and key leaders here in Washington and in Tampa.
Okay, an extremely small group, and he's emphasizing how extremely small that was. This might only been 3 or 4 people total that knew about this mission. Now let's talk about the decoy part of it, because a lot of people have been talking about that. Why do they do the decoy? Well, the decoy is a war strategy that's as old as dirt itself, right? Remember the Trojan horse? That was a decoy. And that's mythical, obviously, but that's an idea of what that is. In the NFL, every running back, what do? They do a head fake, right? They go this way and they intend to go that way. And so the military is no different. So imagine being the crews that get the call up to go do this mission. You know it's going to be in the news, and you're the 2 crews that have to go the opposite direction. But you know what? Everybody does their part. And so that worked out. Now, my question is, why did they send stealth bombers in the opposite direction. If they're stealth, that I don't know. But at any rate, I think it was more along the lines of OPSEC. They wanted to keep people on the ground that might make a phone call or talk to somebody to keep them confused as well. So you can never be too sure about these things. Now, the crews themselves, they fly to where they're going to go and do their mission, and they turn around and they come back. They don't land anywhere in between. All right, every mission the B-2's ever done has been done exactly that way. So they have to aerial refuel numerous times. It's a 15-hour flight from the Midwest over to Iran, and it's, again, about a 17-hour flight back. So this is really long, and they get a little bit of sleep, but you can imagine how, excited and jacked up they were. I don't imagine they got a whole lot of sleep. Their mission was to go to 3 sites in Iran, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. I think Isfahan was the least important of the 3 targets. I'll explain why in a minute, but let's listen to what General Kane had to say next.
The main strike package, comprised of 7 B-2 Spirit bombers, each with 2 crew members, proceeded quietly to the east with minimal communications. Throughout the 18-hour flight into the target area, the aircraft completed multiple in-flight refuelings. Once over land, the B-2s linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex, tightly timed maneuver requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace, all done with minimal communications. This type of integration is exactly what our joint force does better than anyone else in the world.
Okay, so he talked about several things in this clip. He talked about a narrow line to go over there. What is that all about? Well, you've got to get permissions from some of these countries, and they've got to be allies, so they're probably going to go along a path of NATO countries. We're going to let them know just a little bit before these B-2s show up that we're going to do this, but you got to get a buy-in from them. You can't go someplace where it's going to cause political turmoil and so forth. So that's one part of it. Multiple refuelings, we don't know how many. I'm guessing 3 or 4 on the way over, probably 4 or 5 on the way back. Again, these are not airliners that are designed to go for 16, 17 hours at a time. So they do have to refuel. And again, we talked about the crews having to swap out as they were going. At some point, as they're crossing the Atlantic, going over into Europe, getting closer to their target, they're going to get joined up by fighters. And this is the latest generation fighters, the F-22s, the F-35s. They are stealth-ish, but they're not as stealth as the B-2. So they're going to escort these guys as they get closer and closer to harm's way. Then they're going to act as decoys, and they're going to peel off at the last minute. But let's talk about that in a minute, because this is really a cool operation. And again, he emphasized minimal communication. How can you do that? You're told exactly what your slice of the pie is. And that's what's really cool about how the U.S. operates here. Let's listen in.
At approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time last night, and just prior to the strike package entering Iran, a U.S. submarine in the Central Command Area of Responsibility launched more than 24 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles against key surface infrastructure targets at Isfahan. As the Operation Midnight Hammer strike package entered Iranian airspace, the U.S. employed several deception tactics, including decoys, as the 4th and 5th generation aircraft pushed out in front of the strike package at high altitude and high speed, sweeping in front of the package for enemy fighters and surface-to-air missile threats. The strike package was supported by U.S. Strategic Command, U.S. Transportation Command, U.S. Cyber Command, U.S. Space Command, U.S. Space Force, and U.S. European Command.
So that's a lot of different military arms of the service being incorporated into this. And so a tremendous amount of coordination goes into this. They have whole commands that do nothing but coordinate communication. But let's talk about the little details here. And before we jump into those details, I want to talk to you about the bigger picture of how the U.S. military works and why they are so lethal. It's not just technology. Yep, we got great airplanes, we got great bombs. It's more the people, and here's why. We operate on a system of trust. We train, many of these B-2 pilots were in their 20s, maybe the early 30s. These are young men and women. We trust them because we train them, but we also give them these $500 million airplanes with huge bombs on them to go fly halfway around the world. And we're not worried or concerned in the least that they're going to take that airplane and fly and sell it to some foreign country. Most other countries are. China, Iran, the others. They put political officers in place to make sure that their people do what they're commanded to do, but they are a central command and control climate. In other words, if the Ayatollah doesn't say do it, it doesn't get done. That bogs the system down. We train each one of our pilots and our crews to adapt and overcome, and we trust them with that process. That is extremely lethal. So now they're heading over there. They get into close to Iran. They're joined up by those 4th and 5th generation fighters. They're going to at first act as an escort, but then they're going to act as decoys. And that's the cool part of what he said here. They're going to go out ahead, because if they stay with the B-2s, they will be detected, and that puts the B-2s in more harm. Remember, the B-2s are just bombers. They're kind of defenseless in the sense that they don't have missiles and guns to defend themselves. They depend on the fighters to do that. So they're going to stay with them as long as they can, the fighters are, but then they're going to peel off and they're going to go ahead. So the first warning, or the first idea that Iran got that war was coming, was when these fighters showed up and they clear out all the surface-to-air missile sites. Now, most of those sites had already been cleared out in the last 2 weeks by the Israelis, but just in case they didn't hit them all, the fighters go in, they clear all that out, they clear out a nice wide path for these B-2s to show up. Let's take a look at what General Kane is calling the package. I love this terminology.
As the strike package approached Fordo and Natanz, the U.S. protection package employed high-speed suppression weapons to ensure safe passage of the strike package, with fighter assets employing preemptive suppressing fires against any potential Iranian surface-to-air threats. We are currently unaware of any shots fired at the U.S. strike package on the way in.
So that tells you that what the Israelis were doing over the last 2 weeks was very effective. They had taken out most of these surface-to-air missile sites just in case the decoy package or the fighter package goes out ahead, and they make sure that all of that is decimated, clearing that path for the B-2s. The B-2s are about to come. Let's listen to this next clip, because I want to talk about the difference between bunkers and bunker busters, okay? Because the two things have been in competition with each other for quite some time, and it's a fascinating conversation.
At approximately 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:10 a.m. Iran time, the lead B-2 dropped 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons on the
huge.
first of several aim points at Fordo. As the president stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against 2 nuclear target areas. All 3 Iranian nuclear infrastructure targets were struck between 6:40 p.m. and 7:05 p.m. Eastern time. Again, that's about 2:10 in the morning local time in Iran, with the Tomahawk missiles being the last to strike at Esfahan to ensure we retain the element of surprise throughout the operation.
I'll explain that.
In total, U.S. forces employed approximately 75 precision-guided weapons during this operation. This included, as the president stated last night, 14 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, marking the first ever operational use of this weapon.
Okay, so the first ever operational use of this weapon. So it's relatively new to the inventory. Let's go back and talk about the history of bunker busters a little bit. The first generation back in the 70s and early 80s got dropped, and it would penetrate about 5 feet into the concrete or into the ground and explode, and limited effectiveness, right? The next generation in the early 2000s, and this would be when we were bombing Afghanistan and places like that. You heard about the Moab, right? Now the Moab, the mother of all bombs, I think people called it, but it was a massive ordnance air bomb. It actually was not a bunker buster. I think a lot of people thought it was. It's not. It was meant to destroy buildings on the surface, but not bunker bust. The second generation of bunker busters were made out of old howitzer muzzles, basically, that were really hard steel, and they readapted those things to become missiles, and they would go about 20 feet down on the ground and blow up. Very effective, but not like this. The MOP is unbelievable. This thing penetrates 200 feet into the ground. How does it do that? It's unbelievable how it does it. But it's made out of this Elgin steel. It's a alloy steel that's super hard. The triggering device is at the back of the bomb, clearly. It's still, in a sense, kind of a dumb bomb. It's got GPS to guide it. So that makes it a smart bomb. But it's something that you have to drop. It's not like a missile where it guides itself or it flies itself in. You have to drop it close to the target, and then the fins on the back help with the GPS, help go right through the window or into the ground where you want to go into the ground. Now, let's talk about bunkers versus bunker busters. It's been a cat and mouse game between us and Iran over the years, and there's something called UHPC, which is ultra high performance concrete. It's about 6 times stronger than normal concrete. The Iranians have been building these underground bunkers out of this UHPC. Now, that begs the question, if you're pursuing a peaceful nuclear program, why are you building underground bunkers, number one? And why are you building them out of this super strong concrete? The difference with UHPC and regular concrete is that it's flexible. Now, not totally flexible, but it doesn't crumble. It's not brittle like normal concrete, and it's super strong. So it's got all sorts of, it's got glass fibers and carbon fiber steel inserts mixed into the concrete, which makes it really super strong. Now, the old Moabs could blow up stuff on the surface, but they couldn't penetrate, especially this UHPC. Now, this GBU-57, which is, they call it the MOP, right? It's the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, and it is massive. It weighs 30,000 pounds. 30,000 pounds. It's 20 feet long. I think 2.4 tons of that is the explosive on the inside. The majority of the weight in that 30,000 pounds is just the casing of this bomb, right? It's got to have its own mass. It's got to be dropped from a certain high altitude so that it gets maximum speed as it penetrates into the ground or into the building or the bunker that you want to go to. But imagine driving down on the ground 200 feet before it explodes. This thing is extremely effective. So the purpose is to penetrate the earth. It'll go through 200 feet of just dirt, or it'll go through 60 feet of that UHPC. I don't know anybody that's going to build their bunkers with 60 feet of concrete on them. I don't know even if you could. And the outer casing is the thing that really makes the difference in this. The B2 can carry 2 of these at once because they weigh so much. They weigh 30,000 pounds each. That's the equivalent of like 10 VW Beetles. All right, that you're dropping with each one of these. They cost $15 million each, so they're not cheap. Now, the Tomahawk cruise missiles he talked about at the end, they went to the last site, the Isfahan site. I think that was the least high priority of the 3, and he said it was a coordinated operation from a submarine. That I think I heard a report that they fired 30 of these things. Tomahawks are not bunker busters. They're going to do a lot of damage on the surface. They can actually go to multiple sites and drop ordnance at each one of those. They're kind of cool. They've been around forever. But I think they weren't so concerned with bunker busting there at that 3rd site as they were with the other 2. So the 12 or 14, I've heard a report of these MOPs went to the first 2 sites, and the Tomahawks went to the 3rd. Let's see what General Kane has to say next.
Following weapons release, the Midnight Hammer strike package exited Iranian airspace, and the package began its return home. We are unaware of any shots fired at the package on the way out. Iran's fighters did not fly, and it appears that Iran's surface-to-air missile systems did not see us. Throughout the mission, we retained the element of surprise.
Called air superiority. The last 2 weeks and all the bombing of all those surface-to-air missile sites and presumably a lot of their military bases really kind of wiped out their ability. Maybe their ability was overhyped. Who knows? But you got to be sure. So again, air superiority, this is control of the skies. Once you gain control of the skies, now you can come and be precise with your attacks. And one of the things I nobody wants war, right? And nobody likes any of this. But one of the things that is, I guess, better about this than it could be is that it's very precise. It's very surgical. They're not going after civilian places with collateral damage. They're going after military sites. And we've been talking about the Iranians getting a nuclear bomb for 30 years. And so I think the time has come to put that one to bed. And I think we did this week with Operation Midnight Hammer. Let's take a look at what General Kane has to say next.
More than 125 U.S. aircraft participated in this mission, including B-2 stealth bombers, multiple flights of fourth and fifth generation fighters, dozens and dozens of air refueling tankers, a guided missile submarine, and a full array of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, as well as hundreds of maintenance and operational professionals. As the Secretary said, this was the largest B-2 operational strike in U.S. history and the second longest B-2 mission ever flown, exceeded only by those in the days following 9/11.
Yep. And so it's an incredibly long mission. It's going to be probably 35 hours airborne. And I can tell you, having flown 17 hours at a time, I can't imagine how awful being airborne for 35 hours are. But that is a great testament to the men and the women on the ground, in the airplanes, in the refuelers, the jet fighters that escorted these guys in, that shot, did the decoy package and everything else. And the general is right to pat them on the back and say, job well done. Now, there's something called BDA, which will take place after the initial attack, battlefield damage assessment, to see how effective this was. And that's a little harder to quantify. You got to do it with satellites. Maybe you got some assets on the ground. You can take a look. No doubt the Iranians' nuclear program has been set back years, maybe even decades. And I don't think there's anybody on this planet that'll argue that's a bad thing. I think everybody will say that's a pretty good thing, to take those things out of the hands of people who are been sponsoring terrorism around the world. Let's take a look at what General Kane does to wrap this up, and then I'll give you my final thoughts.
I am particularly proud of our discipline related to operational security, something that was of great concern to the President, the Secretary, General Kurilla, and me, and we will continue to focus on this. As we stand here this morning, many assets are still airborne, and we have hundreds deployed. I ask that we keep our warfighters on their way home and our deployed service member in our thoughts. Our joint force remains ready to defend the United States, our troops, and our interests in the region. Thank you very much.
Okay, so operational security is the thing he talks about at the end, and everybody was totally concerned about that. Obviously, it was a huge success. This didn't leak ahead of time, which is great. OPSEC is one of those things that was drilled into me on active duty in my time as a reserve. So if you'd go out to dinner someplace and somebody would meet you that you didn't know and start just chatting it up with you, you didn't talk about military, you didn't talk about anything other than just vanilla stuff, right? And you got to be careful because you never know who's trying to gather information. And in this day and age of, texting and all the communication we have, OPSEC is even more of a concern than it's ever been before. But clearly, they kept the cat in the bag until this thing took place. It was, I think, a resounding success as far as these things go. And we'll see in the days and weeks to come. I heard that there was just a ceasefire announced. Hopefully and prayerfully that continues, and we can have a peaceful future with our friends in the Middle East, especially Iran. That's my hope and that's my prayer. And although this is an unfortunate circumstance, you can argue whether it was necessary or not. At least we know how it was carried out. We know it was successful. And that, Chaz, thanks for asking that question. It's been a pleasure to talk and give you some of the details behind what General Kane wasn't telling you. Now you know. I'm Captain Steve. Fly safe.